And we are back, sponsored by Fisher. It's a brand of water from
Alsace.
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 We're going to talk about Rolex, the number one brand in the game.
Yes, indeed.
So that's not mine. It is yours.
Yeah, it is. It's mine actually. Yours would be
I'm
slightly
going to put
different.
mine here on the side of the video.
And you would see that there's a few differences with the optics watch. For instance, his would have the solid end links. It would also have the Luminova dial as opposed to the tritium dial that you've got here. And his would have a flip-flop clasp.
Flip-flop.
The secured clasp as opposed to this version. This is one from the end of 1995.
Down just a little. Oh, okay.
So from 1995, which I bought in 2013. I think I mentioned it a couple of times already in previous videos. It's by far my favorite Rolex model, and it was the first ever Rolex I bought. Not this one, but another one that I bought in 2002.
That's funny. That was also my first Rolex.
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting how it goes, because when you at first, when you don't know watches, you think that Rolex is the best thing ever just because of the reputation. And then you learn just enough to be dangerous, and you think that it's completely overrated, and you're going for anything but Rolex because you think that you know better. And then you learn a little bit more, and then you realize that no,
that it is the best.
you know nothing, Jon Snow. Yeah. And then you come back to it. But at that time, I was coming around, and I'm like, it's extremely well made, it's sturdy, it stands the reason why it's been so popular over the years. It's just a very good design. But I didn't want something that screamed Rolex in the same way that a Submariner or GMT Master does for a sports model. And this was flying entirely under the radar.
Well, it was also cheaper.
Yeah, it was cheaper, but I could have. Frankly, I had the budget for any of the other ones, but at that time it was really more like, this doesn't look like a Rolex. Nobody's gonna know it's a Rolex, and therefore it's not a problem to wear it anywhere. I'm never gonna get mugged with that on my wrist because it doesn't look like a Rolex. So and I love the fact that it had this really legible white dial with the black hand. It's probably the best legibility that you're going to be finding on any Rolex.
And also it's so aerodynamic. You get the great complication, but you don't get anything in the way. You don't get the size. So slim.
Yeah, it was same. It fits under a cuff. 100 meter water resistance. Already at the time I bought it, and again it was in Paris. I was traveling quite a bit, so it was useful to have a 24 hours complication, and I just absolutely loved the look of this. And what you were saying is true. At that time, compared to the new version, or brand new in box or at retail, you had a pretty steep devaluation. You probably had 20 or 30% off on this when you bought it second hand, when you might have had maybe only 10% at that time on a Submariner. What's interesting also is that at the time I bought it, people don't realize that, and I'm not sure I said it in another video, so stop me if I'm repeating myself, but in the early 2000s it was very difficult to find Rolex sports models. There was already a shortage at that time, which eased up around 2004, 2005, and then again it got crazy 2 or 3 years ago. But in the early 2000s it was almost impossible to find a sports model in retail. You just didn't have them.
Really?
Yeah, because I remember looking for one in Paris at the time in 2002, and I just couldn't find one. And I couldn't find, and you couldn't find a Submariner, and you couldn't find a Sea Dweller. The Daytona were always difficult to find, so that's that's always been the case ever since they came in with their Sapphire versions, and it exploded. But way back then, at least when I got interested into this in 2000 until 2002, 2003, you just couldn't find one in retail, and I had to buy one secondhand. And just to illustrate how difficult it was, is the guy I bought it from. He wanted a sea dweller and he couldn't find one, but he went to, I think the guy was living in Paris, but he went to Nice for whatever reason, and he saw that at a retailer, at an AD, and although it was not the watch he wanted, he still bought it because it was so difficult to find any sports model. So he said, I can't find a sea dweller, but I'll get an Explorer 2 because at least I'll have something. Early 2000s. So
in Paris, in France.
But it was in France. But it was the same thing because I was going to London quite a few times every year at the time. I was going to the US. I was going to Germany because my parents live right next to the German border. Across the board, it was very difficult to find a Rolex sports model. So it's not, when people are saying, it's Rolex, it's not the first time they're at it, know. And I don't know whether they had real supply issues or whether they decided that, okay, let's try to constrain supply in order to, prop up the desirability or the demand. But this is not the first time this is happening, right? So I bought it from, I bought that watch's predecessor in 2002, box paper, everything and all that. And I remember that the price at the time, the list price in retail must have been around 36 or 3,700 euros, and I bought it from him like 2 or 3 months after he had it, and I paid 31. And then a few years later I decided to sell it in 2005, if I recall.
So although it was hard to find, you still got a discount.
Yeah.
People were not in the mentality that, hey, there should be a premium on this thing.
No, absolutely not, because people were not, there was hardly any speculation on these watches at that time. The only model that was speculative was the Daytona. Even at that time, and even when it eased up, around 2003, 2004, the Daytona was still very difficult to find. And you would go at an AD and they tell you, look, there's 1 to 2 years wait list for this. We don't mind putting you on the wait list, but just so you know, it's going to be that. And the price at the time was probably around the 6,500 euros, and it was going second hand at 8,500, 9,000 euros. So the Daytona was going above retail, has been doing this forever, but it was really not the case for the other models, even in the early 2000s. And I remember because the place I was living in Paris was very close to a very big Rolex AD and a watch store that's been there for 80 or 90 years and it's probably been a Rolex dealer for almost as long. And in 2000, and I was passing by that shop every day, and in 2002 you would find any kind of Datejust, day date or two-tone sports model. And from 2003, 2004, you started to have everything in the sports model line in the shop except for the Daytona. But if you wanted a sea dweller, you could have it. You wanted the GMT Master, you would probably have like the 3 choices of bezel.
Or was it a change of taste, or maybe people wanted to buy a Panerai or an IWC at the moment?
No. I don't think so, because certainly when on watch forums at the time, Rolex was still talked about in the same way that it is right now, so very highly regarded, and it already had tremendous brand equity, and you had quite a number of people who you could see daily, certainly in Paris, wearing a sub or a GMT Master. So no, it was really a supply demand imbalance at the time that eased up in the mid 2000. So first iteration I got it, so it was a watch from 2002. It had a Luminova dial, solid end link, very much the same thing as yours.
It's around 99 2000 that they changed to the solid end link, the no holes cases, and Luminova. So
I think the solid end link is 2000. I think the no holes case is 2003, if I'm not mistaken, 2003 or 2004, one of those two. Luminova, so it's tritium until 1998. Then for a year from 1998 to 1999, you had Luminova, and that's what's called Swiss-only dial, right? You don't have Swiss-made, you have just Swiss at the bottom of the dial at 6 o'clock. And then from 2000, it's Super Luminova, and then you have Swiss-made. So that's, broad brush, variations you could find at the time.
The very latest, 2006, 2007, you would get the Rolex on the Rehaut and the upgraded movement.
Yes, until 2011, until they retired the watch. So you are correct. There's some.
Just saying, for if someone wants the latest iteration, but I think that you were annoyed by the green hue of the indices constantly in the daylight, right?
So what's interesting is that if you look at those models in the Super Luminova dial, depending on the year, if you're lucky, the lume is actually quite white gray. It's kind of okay. But some years, for some reason, because of the batch of Luminova that they were using, and especially against a white dial where any variation in color is going to pop, right? Some of them were just green all the time.
Yeah.
And it was the case for mine. So end 2001, 2002. And it's interesting because I've seen a number of these watches and they're all the same. So that thing was green all the time, and I was like, that's not. I didn't find it particularly pleasing, and also Luminova hands and indices on this generation on Rolex just doesn't work particularly well because there's not enough lume. These were settings that were designed for tritium. And tritium, you don't charge line with the light with it. It's something that's radioactive, that's degrading, and it's the degradation that produces that light. And even no matter how much quantity you put, it's still going to glow in the dark, for a period of time, and then it's going to die. I think its half-life is 7 and something years. So after 7 years, it decreases by 50%. Then another 7 years, another 50% or 50%, so 75%. And then after 15, 18 years, you can't see anything. The Luminova, as people know, it kind of charges the light, and then it's very, very bright, and then it decreases very, very quickly, unless you have a really large quantity of it, like you have, for instance, on the Tudor Pelagos, which is the best lume that I've had on any watches I've ever owned, and that thing charges light like crazy, and it remains bright through the night, whereas that first Rolex that I had, the first iteration, just didn't do this. So I'm like, okay, it's something.
Yeah, mine, it's enough. I like. See, I went for a functional one. When I had the choice, if I was paying a bit more, I would have gotten the ones with the patina, older ones. I wanted to have a very functional watch, one that had been serviced and everything, with the Super Luminova, with the no-holes case, and with the solid end link. And and I love it. And the purchasing experience was good, and the price was good. So, but you decided to move on from the.
Yeah, and I moved on because it's also the time that I went like full on vintage, and I think I sold it to buy a GMT Master 1675, because I'm like, okay, I still want a GMT function, but they're just cooler. It's the acrylic crystal, Pepsi bezel, and all that.
It's so different. I mean, same movement and then such a difference.
So same functionality at least, and
have you ever turned that bezel to calculate a time difference ever in your life?
Yes, I have, because I was traveling with it.
Okay.
I was traveling to. At that time, I was working for a company that's based on the west coast of the US, so it was actually fairly convenient for me even to take conference calls to set the bezel to the time it was in San Francisco. So yeah, it had a practical usage.
You're one of the very few who's using it, because I'm sure most people who buy the Pepsi and the Bad Girl barely use that function.
Yeah, but and then after that I moved to Asia in 2006, meaning that my family in France are 6 hours behind permanently.
And then you can have LA,
my
New York.
the head office of my current company is on the east coast of the US, so it's kind of
It's perfect.
good to have this if you travel a bit. So it's one of the most
GMT
useful
function is the best function.
I mean, especially
in the
like
watch, really.
where expats were living thousands of miles away from family,
And we can barely count.
and we can barely count.
-6, +7.
Yeah,
Can't be bothered.
Exactly. So it's I let go of this watch, but then what happened is in 2008 I bought a Grand Seiko that was very similar to an Explorer 2 black dial.
So the Rolex killer.
Exactly. So SBGM 001 for people who like it, which by the way beats the crap out of the Explorer 2 for finishing. And I've owned both, and I love that Rolex reference. But
was it the black dial version?
Yes, SBGM 001, and it was just a fantastic watch. It's yeah, that's exactly this. Great. The quality of this was just unbelievable. The finishing of the hands and the dial. And the case and everything. And I remember coming to the office when it was at the time I was already in Singapore.
Yeah.
I came to the office with this watch on my wrist, and one of my colleagues had the black dial 16570, and we put it next to each other, and the guy became livid because he's like, this is just a higher degree of execution than the Explorer.
Very similar bezel. I mean, when you look at these two together.
Yeah, exactly. And he ended up selling his Rolex, and he bought a Grand Seiko. Not that model, but he bought a Grand Seiko afterwards. So
you ruined his life.
Exactly.
What year was this?
So that was in 2008. So my Grand Seiko.
So back then already you were hip to Grand Seiko, which really came in its own later in most people's minds.
It's interesting on Grand Seiko because there's a watch forum I was and I'm still a part of in France, and there's a number of guys from the mid 2000s who were saying these things are amazing, and the price they're at for what they are is incredible. Like they beat the Swiss like hands down, and then I went to see for myself, and I loved that thing. I saw the Snowflake for the first time at about the same time. I was blown away by the dial. I didn't particularly care for the case.
How did it when it came later? So Snowflake was already
probably around 2009, 2010. But yes,
okay.
you around that time. So at least 10 years ago. And I just found the dial amazing, but it was not for me because of the case size and.
I think in many people's mind, Grand Seiko is. I mean, we know it has a longer history, but all these models. We feel it's more recent than it really is, but it's been around for long.
It's been around, and they've been beating the Swiss at chronometry competition back in the late 60s and the early 70s, and when the Swiss saw that, they cancelled the competition. That's they're not very fair play from that standpoint. And so I had that watch. I kept it for 2-3 years, then I sold it. But I still wanted an Explorer 2 type watch, so I bought a reference 16550, which is the predecessor of this watch, with a black dial. So the 16550, it's an interesting reference. It wasn't produced for a very long time. It was produced for 5 years, if I recall. They came in either a white dial version. A number of the early one were turning cream, so that's now very desirable. So that's the one. That's like a cream. That's a cream dial. So yeah, that's it's quite beautiful. Very difficult to read, by the way, because at that time the hands were silver against a white or this cream dial as it turned, and it's more difficult to read. But you also had the black version of it. I didn't want to get the cream color dial because there's so many of them that I've been fiddled with. It's one of the most dangerous Rolex references, the 16550 with a cream dial, because so many people have baked the dial just because it doubles or triples the watch. So I think that this is a 16570 because just the reference is just the numbers are different on the bezel, but and one of the main things as well is that the case is much thicker.
Here we go.
That's the one. You see much squarer numerals on the bezel. It also has a substantially thicker case. It's got the same case as.
Wait, let me turn the picture. Oh yeah.
Exactly. It's got the same case as the GMT Master 2 Fat Lady 16760, and that's because the movement inside, which is reference 3085, is a pretty thick movement as well. And I liked it for some time until the thickness of the case started to bother me, because what it would do is, what we talked about in the first video, it started to turn on my wrist. I realized it had a life of its own. It was quite top heavy.
Maybe it didn't like you.
And maybe it didn't like me. It's the case for a lot of people apparently. So I let go of that watch again. And finally, in 2013, I bought this one in.
Have you looked into this before?
I love this, but even when I was getting interested into watches, these were already expensive.
It was already very expensive.
Yeah, they were at that time. They were probably any model was probably $7,000 or $8,000 US dollars.
Now you're looking at 20 grand, I suppose,
minimum. But it's interesting because the prices of them have been at the same level for a long time. It's really everything else that has caught up now. The 5513, the 1675. That's been expensive for a long time. Especially
and this one has been very segmented as well, because there's different. The dial has changed a lot. The bezel has changed.
So this is the first version, because you see it doesn't have a dot on the second hand, but then you've got at least 3 or 4 iterations of the bezel itself. The dial, three iterations at least. Then you've got like the straight hand or the one with the dot. Again, it's again a reference where you need to be extremely careful, because you have a lot of Franken watches where it's not the bezel is not consistent with the case serial number and so forth. So you Explorer 2 are a minefield for the vintage references, and you really need to go to a very reputable dealer if that's what you want to buy, because the chance that you're going to be sold something that's dodgy is extremely high. So I didn't want any of this. I just wanted, again, a very simple, GMT type watch that I could wear every day, because even the GMT Master that I had was no longer particularly suited to that usage. And I went in Tsimsha Choi to a second-hand watch dealer, and he had 5 Explorer 2 with a wide dial. One of them was a 16550, not the one with the cream patina, but a later version without that defect. But I didn't want that because I knew I wouldn't like the case. He had a couple of ones which had a Luminova dial, which I didn't care for, and he had a couple of those with tritium dial. One which was where the patina was extremely white, like almost ghost white, I would call this, which is interesting in and of itself, because the contrast is brought by the fact that this white is extremely matte and chalky, like chalk, versus a dial that's more like porcelain white. So it's kind of interesting, but I wanted something that had just a little bit more patina, and this one I thought was nice because it had an ivory type patina on the hands and indices. The patina is quite consistent between the two as well, and the condition was just fantastic. As in, I bought that watch. It's from 1995. It still had the Rolex sticker on the back, so that's 18 years, after that watch was produced. So it had faded slightly, but that told me that the watch had been very seldom worn. Otherwise, the sticker would have gone for a long time. That watch, I've got the papers. It was originally sold in Australia in early '96. I don't know how it made its way to Hong Kong, but again, these are two very hot countries, and if that watch had been worn a lot, the sticker would just have come off. Case in point, I started to wear this all the time, and within a year, it did come off. So and that's why when I bought it, I looked at everything. I looked at how sharp the lugs were, how tight the bracelet was, the fact that there wasn't any dent anywhere. Another good pointer that this watch would not have been worn a lot is the fact that the bezel didn't have any scratch at all.
And this is a beautiful polished line on the bezel. If you're familiar with this watch, it's one of those things that you pick up sometimes, and it makes it a bit more special.
Yes, no, and this is where it didn't have any dent anywhere. It didn't have any scratch on the bezel, and this is not a bezel that can be refinished, right? You have to replace it if you got a deep scratch into this, and it's quite easy actually to scratch it. I tend to be careful with my watches, and I've worn this in a lot of sports occasion. I don't tend to scratch it, but a number of people do. So what I generally believe is that this watch had hardly been worn, probably never got polished. There's no way to know for sure, but the condition was great. The price at that time, 7 years ago, was still very decent, very reasonable for what it was. So I bought that. It had the papers, which for me was definitely a plus. And in the past 7 years, this is by far the model I've worn the most because it just suits my lifestyle. It's got the functions that I like. Now, I as I was explaining in the other video, I'm probably wearing this a little bit more these days because in terms of being suited for sporting activity, is just as competent as this watch for this. But that has a very special place in my collection.
I think if you have them serviced and the seals are good, then this watch, especially when you travel, because it's a bit older, it's got some scratches. You're not going to be worried when you pick up your luggage and whatnot, or on the plane. It's a bit more under the radar. You can travel to Europe without getting mugged, and at the same time you have the functionalities, the date and the GMT.
I did get this one serviced. I got it serviced at Classic Watch Repair. That's
where my watch comes from.
Yeah.
And big hello to Watch Snob. Many people know him here in Hong Kong. He's he's got a regular job, but as a side job, he moves a lot of watches. And I met him. He had hurt his foot that day, so I went to meet him where he lived to pick up my first Rolex, my Explorer 2 Polar Dial.
Yeah, it's
and I got a great price. Actually, he made a mistake on the price. He told me a couple of days later, but he says, "Okay, you can keep it." My bad. But the watch came from Classic Watch Repair, which you guys would be familiar with, not just because we mention it quite often, but also they just did a video on YouTube. Who was it? Actually, it was with a watch snob with Paul. But also, I think a Revelation Watch also did a video with them.
Did they?
With Michael Young about not just the shop, but also because it's a repair shop. They got all the tools to repair the Rolex. They sell beautiful vintage watches. You can trust them, and they also do the Undone watch brand. So those vintagey kind of watches.
It's really quirky. I really like. I have tremendous respect for Michael Young. I mean, when it comes down to
super enthusiast,
to repairing a Rolex bracelet, including the riveted ones, which are notoriously fragile and difficult to repair, or even the junk that came after, the folded ones, he turned them back new. And he's one of the very, very few people in the world who's capable of doing this. His technicians are super well trained, and you were talking about guys you can buy from in confidence. In Hong Kong, this is one of them.
Yeah, people ask me sometimes on email where to go. I think most of the times you get genuine watches. You can go to London watches as well in
Yes.
Yomate. They're very good.
That's where I got
And
my
around there, this Yomate, there's a lot of vintage watches.
I got my my Tudor 79090 from a London watch.
It's a beautiful shop.
Beautiful shop.
Beautiful selection.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's good to know Michael at Classic Watch Repair, because you can bring them all the watches, and they're gonna take good care and be very honest if
there's an issue.
whether they can or cannot fix it. I brought them my Zenith. Not an easy watch to fix, but otherwise, vintage watch concept is well established as well in Central on this side of Hong Kong.
They have a shop in Bangkok as well, don't they? Vintage Concept, I think so.
That's possible, yeah.
And but they've got amazing stuff, and again, trusted dealer. So
you were mentioning the things you look out for when you buy this. So you're gonna look. I mean, the obvious things, you want a symmetry between the lugs. You want to see the bevel.
So
gotta be careful though, because some people are probably gonna specialize into making that bevel.
So the symmetry between the lugs, you have to be careful, because it's never exactly symmetrical on the left side and the right side. And that's just because of the design and the crown guard.
So even at the very end, it's not going to be.
Well,
there's going to be a bit more meat.
Yes, there's
all the way down.
There's always a bit more meat on the left side compared to the right side, so that's normal. But what you want is something that's really sharp.
Right.
If possible, you want to see the bevels that are clear on the side of the watch. Importantly, we were talking about the bottom of this. What you want this to be razor sharp here. You want it razor sharp, and you don't want it pointy. If it's pointy, it's been over polished, and that's going to be an issue. Another cue that it's been over polished is that the spring bars are going to stick out for those models which still have the holes in the lugs.
For those that don't have the holes, have you ever seen one polished to death to the point of actually seeing the hole?
No, not really.
Is
because
that possible? Does it go that far?
they're too recent, right? So 15, 17. It's not like you've got a watch from 1989 where it starts to be 30 plus years, first series, where it would have been polished so many times. So yes, the general sharpness of the case is important, particularly that bit. The spring bars not coming out, and you need to use your hands, as in you need to feel that the bezel doesn't have any ding around it. You need to feel also the crystal, because it's not uncommon for the crystal to chip, because it stands proud about a millimeter or so. If you are buying one which doesn't have a solid head link, so if you have that, so that's hollow, you want to make sure that it's not starting to collapse. So it should still be flush, or very close to being flush with the bezel. If it's starting to sink in, that's not very good, because you're probably going to have to replace them. Very easy test on the bracelet, for whether it's stretched or not. Sorry.
Here, there you go.
So if the bracelet is stretched or not.
Yeah.
When I bought it, there was literally zero stretch. Any hint of stretch that there is me wearing it intensively for 7 years, but it's still in great nick.
And contrary to what you might think, is wearing it tight doesn't create as much stress as wearing it loose.
I think so, yes, because
it's going to always pull on it.
It's going to have more inertia.
Yeah.
And it's going to make the bracelet looser if you wear it loose. You're absolutely correct. Something that you want to do as well is, if you buy it from a second-hand dealer, or anyone really, is you want to look at the serial number that is going to be at 6 o'clock. And what you want to check is on the inside of the clasp, right there. So you're probably not going to see it, but here you would have a marking as well. Generally a letter and a number. The letter allows you to figure out the year of production of the bracelet, and the number is going to be the month within that year. And what you want to have is something that is, quite close. If the watch was produced in, the head of the watch was produced in in 1995, for instance, but the bracelet was produced, say, in February 1996, it's probably still the original bracelet, because in the sequence of their production, not everything is necessarily done at the same time and assembled at the same time. So you still want something to be ballpark in the same range. Otherwise, it has been replaced. Not that the fact that it's replaced is a problem in and of itself, but if a watch is being sold as original, it should have something that is consistent. So that's also something to
it can
look
have
for.
some bargaining power for you when you buy your watch, if you know something that the dealer doesn't.
The other thing, very easy test, is you just pull the crown and you wind it, and it needs to be relatively smooth. If you find it hard to do, if it goes like every time, it means that the oils are stale, and it means that you're going to have problem down the line, and you need to have it serviced. So that's a very easy test. Just the functionality of the watch, you just want to make sure that everything works in the way that it's supposed to, that the hour hand jumps in the way that it's supposed to. So this is still the 3185 movement inside. So the older generation movement. The later generation is the 3186. If you want to see the difference between the two, you will notice that there's just a little bit of wiggle of the
the other hands are going to move
of the other hands, whereas in the 3186 they dissociated them and you don't have that. And another way, probably even more important, is if you do a full turn of a bezel here, it's going to have 4 or 5 increment for the hours. On the 3186, it's probably more 8 or 9. If you turn it, just one full turn of the bezel. So that's one of the things you want to check as well on that watch. And then just again, the patina of the hands and indices, if it's consistent, if it's a tritium dial. Having said that, there's many instances where, although they're both going to be tritium, the patina is not going to be consistent. It could be that they have been changed during a service by other tritium hands, but also sometimes it's the original hands, but you still have a different patina, and that's stemming from the fact that Rolex was not producing everything. So they would have a manufacturer for their hands, and they would have another one or 3 or 4 other ones for their dials, and therefore it would not have been the same batch of tritium, and therefore sometimes you do have differences in patina, even if everything is original. So it's impossible to tell unless you buy it from the original owner, who tell you, look, I've never serviced it, that's how it came. But apart from that, you never really know if it's going to be original or not, which is the reason why, in doubt, it's probably better to get something that has a uniform patina. Collectors look after this kind of things. It's always nicer and probably a bit more valuable to have something that is really consistent across the board. By all means, use a loop to see if there's no dust on the dial as well. But if you've done, also if you can, and if you are at a dealer, I would also really recommend to have the case back open, just to check that the case is not pitted, and that's really important, because I bought that as a sports watch. I was going to go in the water with this and or run with this or even play tennis with this. I wanted something that was functional and where the water resistance was not compromised, and you have to take a look at the inner case to make sure that the case is not pitted, especially around the threading where the case back goes in. So this is another important thing. If you can have a look or get a picture, if you're buying online, make sure you get that. If you can get also a picture of the inside of the case, you can learn a few things in there, because if it's been serviced at Rolex, what they do is they use a marker, and they will probably tell you, the date of the service, or you can check whether it's been serviced by Rolex in this way in a number of cases. I'm not sure they're doing this anymore, but they were certainly doing it in the 80s and the 90s. So that's a few of the things that if you did all of this and you were satisfied with what you saw, you're probably not going to have a bad surprise. So that's at least what I would do.
I mean, the thing, you don't want a surprise. I mean, it's okay that not everything is perfect.
It's
It just has to be reflected in the price. But if you're really a finicky collector, then you want to have the ultimate. And the last thing is the clasp. So I have the one with the fold over.
Yeah.
And you were saying that even back in the mid 90s, you could ask to have the fold over clasp from the whole bracelet actually from the Submariner.
Yeah. So there was 3 variations of bracelet standard on this watch, and there was an optional bracelet. So from 1989, when this watch came out, until 1996, this is a bracelet you would have had, right? So non-solid end link, non-flip lock. So that's just the simplest bracelet you could have. Then from 1997 until 2000, what you had is that they added the flip lock, and you have like this pattern now that kind of emulates the links.
Yeah.
But you still had the hollow end link, and then from 2000 onwards, you had the solid end link with the flip lock. But interestingly, in the 90s, they must have had requests from customers who were really using these watches in tough environments and saying, yeah, it's great, but the clasp is not secure enough, and I'm just afraid of losing it. So can you
watch
provide
made for spelunking, so it's even
spelunking, or
it's a lot more rugged than actually submarine environment.
Yeah, so that and mountaineering or Arctic,
It's going to be knocks all the time.
Exactly. So it was designed to withstand a tough environment, and therefore some people must have asked, okay, I need a security on the clasp, and at that time the only one you could find anywhere in the line would have been on the Submariner, and so from 94 to 96 you could have that as an option. It was actually in the catalog, in the booklets, but you could see that it was for 200 or 300 French francs at the time, because it was for the French catalog. You could have a Submariner bracelet reference 93150 on it. So if you come across a watch from the mid 90s that has this kind of bracelet, it's not necessarily been changed.
Okay.
It could have been an option. So, but fun fact, it's one of these quirky things. But then again, they must have thought, well, it's a bit daft to put a diving watch bracelet with a dive extension on the watch that's not supposed to be diving, and that's the reason why in 1997 they came up with their own version of the flip lock on this bracelet. So that's the logical explanation to it.
You can imagine spelunking is going to get cold. You could want to wear that above your clothes and use that diverse extension.
It could have been that. It's never very clear why Rolex are doing the things that they're doing. But I really think that they have functionality in mind, and there must have been a reason, and they must have heard it from people saying, we need this. Just one thing also. The Rolex Submariner bracelet that I was talking about, that was optional on this watch, it was also optional on the GMT Master 2. You could also request it on the GMT Master 2 for probably the same reasons. So and I'm wondering, and I'm not sure about that, but it might also have been an option on the Explorer 14270. I'm less sure about this one, but certainly this one and the GMT Master 2 reference 16710 had this bracelet as an option.
I'm weighing it because the bracelet feels very light.
Yes,
a lot more flimsy than the one I have.
Well, that's all down to the end link, because the flip lock system would not add too much to it, but there is a difference in heft, and also there's quite a difference in feel when you wear your watch compared to that. It just feels a lot more solid. I was mentioning it the other day. This is going to be, when you wear it, it's just going to you can already hear the noise. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's gonna. It has this, and that's coming from that. But I find this bracelet far more comfortable for my wrist because it's got this articulated link at the end, as opposed to the solid ending where it just sticks out and doesn't suit my wrist as well. So I'm prepared to pay the price of people hearing me come from 10 meters because of the noise, but just because it suits my wrist better and it's more comfortable. So that fits perfectly, and that's one of the reasons why, again, in my collection, that's one of the very last watch I would ever sell, because it just suits my lifestyle, and I like pretty much everything about it. The one I'd go for right now, honestly, is the black one. The black one there's probably $500 to $1,000 difference. It was always less popular than the white dial version, and the black dial Explorer 2 is the only Rolex where I look at everybody's wrists all the time, right? And if it's a white dial Explorer or any other Rolexes, I can find what it is very quickly. The black dial Explorer 2, every time I have to look 2 or 3 times to realize that it's a black dial Explorer 2. It flies so low on anyone's radar that even for someone who's used to these references, it is difficult to find.
You might think it's a Grand Seiko.
You might think it's a Grand Seiko, except that the finishing is not good enough.
It's a great watch for girls. I see many girls wearing these. Don't feel threatened by that in your masculinity. There's still a great watch for everyone.
No,
but for girlfriend, it's a very good, very cool watch because they are sleeker.
Yeah.
And in general, I like sleeker watches, and I think that's what I like about the black base so much.
So,
It's or the Patek for that matter. They just disappear on the wrist, and it feels great.
So the black dial of this one, again, when I see them, the Oyster bracelet gives it away. So you're like, okay, it's a Rolex, but then it takes me a couple of times to say, oh, that's what it is. I didn't realize that. So even to really a trained eye, it disappears. Coming back to the Explorer 2, that's the kind of reference that would work for most people, just because it's very easy to wear. It's we said everything, right? It flies under the radar. It's really super tough.
But that's why it was your first Rolex and mine as well.
Yeah.
And Archie Lecture was right recommending it, and after he did, it got more on the radar of many YouTube channels. I think so.
Oh, so he's to blame for the price appreciation, you reckon?
Probably was just doing it for that, to sell his, to get another.
But then wasn't he?
Little Patek.
Wasn't he crying because he sold it and then he couldn't afford to buy it anymore?
Yeah, you should never sell that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying this one in a hurry either, but it's I find it a bit of a shame that it went up so much, because I would have liked the thought that if you wanted this, there were still some underappreciated models, and you could just pick one for the price of a two-door, right? Because it's more or less what I bought it at the time.
Yeah, the spectrum of affordable, cool watches is getting smaller and smaller, at least in Rolex world.